welcome to another episode of the William Branham Historical Research Podcast. I'm your host, John Collins, the author and founder of William Branham Historical Research at william-branham.org, and with me I have my very special guest, Daniel Bright, nearly former member of YWAM. Daniel, it's good to have you on and to discuss how you were nearly a member of YWAM. Now, there's so much. I was reading through your email this morning before you got on, just trying to familiarize myself with the story. And oh my gosh, so many things that we could talk about. I don't know that we can constrict it to one podcast, but I'm going to try. Maybe if you could just start, introduce yourself and let everybody know a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I am nearly in YWAM. I grew up in East London and I was in a family of 6. We were homeschooled, not for religious or ideological reasons. We just didn't really want to have to get out of bed before 8. So we followed some American curriculum, Sunlight. We went to the local Church of England church. It was 3 minutes walk away. And so my upbringing was within that kind of triangle of being told that I was a liberal Anglican who didn't believe in Calvinism from the Baptists over there. And then I was being told I was a cessationist because I didn't believe in speaking in tongues by the hyper-charismatics there. And then the third option was the liberals who were saying I was a conservative Calvinist. So we had all those kind of 3 things growing up. So I suppose I could write a book called Being a Christian at Church, because that was where I went through a lot of apologetics and defense. So that was the first sort of 20 or so years of my life. And my links, or almost links with the YWAM, date to 2016. I emigrated to Norway there with my wife, who's Norwegian. She was from a Lutheran background up north. And so from Anglicanism and Lutheranism, we chose the local Free Lutheran Church because the National Lutheran Church in Norway is a bit of a dice roll with a very large -5 modifier to that result. So most of the local state Lutheran churches would correspond, I think, to the situation in the US for the Lutheran churches. Not reliably biblical churches which you'd want to go to. Very quickly at the church we went to, which is a great church, many of them are listening, we don't have any issues with them. It was replanted by an ex-YWAMer in the early 80s. The church we went to was about the church we go to back in the early 80s was 6 or 7 people left, very faithful believers, and they said, we're going to fold, but we're going to dig out the basement in our church, and then we're going to just ask anyone, just come in and take it over, we don't mind. So they reached out to the local YWAM base, and an ex-YWAMer said, yeah, I'll replant it. So he and his family of 5 children, very faithful, all still at the church. They gave it a go, and since then it's been really good. So it's kind of an ex-YWAM church, or a church of YWAMers who have been doing it from the early 80s. And funny enough, this church has all the makings of an excellent cult podcast, because the refounder of the church, if you will, his children are still there. One of them's on staff. One of them's married one of the elders who was also there in the 80s. You think, I can see where this is going. But it actually turned out all right. I still do one-to-one Bible studies with the son of the pastor who restarted the church in the 80s. So you can kind of auto-type the direction this church went in the 80s and 90s, or at least what is exposed to. A lot of people in the 90s went along to the Toronto Blessing. They were quite involved in that. And a very particular Norwegian scandal involved in the mid-2000s around their attitude to counselling, which was very untranslatable. I wasn't really sure what that was. So I came in on the scene in 2016 after the church, the local YWAM base. I say the church and the YWAM base, they're more or less one and the same. The YWAM base had planted a school, a very good school, private school, just up the road. So pretty much all of the children at the church went to that school. Again, sounds a little bit cult-like, but it actually worked out all right because they were in Norway. They're in a school in Norway. You know, Norway's not very, it's not very receptive ground for cults. When we got to in 2016, everyone of my generation, I'm 37, 90% of the people in my generation had all done YWAM, but they'd done it locally in Norway about 10, 15 years ago. But what I've seen happening now, this is a 90% YWAM church, what I've seen now is that a lot of the people, a lot younger than me, sort of 19, 20, they're all going to Hawaii, Kona-based Hawaii, which I think several of your guests have spoken about. And I joked with my friends, it's astonishing how many young people God called to Hawaii. I mean, I'm sure there are many better places God could call you to when you're 19. Hawaii has been a strong tendency. So there they've been exposed to people who had gone to Bethel and School of International School of Hogwarts Ministry. I always think of the Harry Potter theme tune whenever I'm thinking of Bethel. 10 points from Bethel door. That's what a lot of people are exposed to increasingly. There's two guys at my church who've got a podcast, and a lot of their guests have been to the Kona base, Hawaii. So the situation in my church was ex-YWAMers who were going to the YWAM bases in Norway, but now a situation is a lot of the children of those ex-YWAMers are going by default to the US and to a base in Montana. I think someone else might have spoken about, which is a problem. Because what tends to happen is, as I said to you in the email, YWAM stands for Young Women After Men, Youth Without Any Money, Youth Wanting a Marriage. And I have a deep respect for a 19, 20-year-old who says, I'm essentially doing this Christian dating for 6 months. Thumbs up from me. Do you DTS, your discipleship training school, for 6 months? You meet your wife, you shouldn't really be dating anyway. But you do date, and you end up getting married. And I've got a lot of respect for that. And then they get out and they get on with their real lives, they get a job. Great. The negative side of what I'm seeing isn't really theological. I mean, the charismatic aside, there's not sort of mass fake healings going on in my church. What is happening is that men, and mainly men in their late 20s, early 30s, suddenly go, oh my goodness, hang on a second. I need to settle down. I need a job. You've talked about this loads in all your episodes. They don't get pensions contributions. They haven't got a mortgage on the go. There's no insurance because they've been volunteering the whole time with YWAM. That's not a problem that's unique to YWAM. But Jehovah's Witnesses have this going on as well. And so they hit sort of 35, and the content of their newsletters, their prayer newsletters, changes from pray for us to go out to Bhutan, to Ukraine, to do this and that. And suddenly their newsletter is, can you help us get a car? Can you help us get a mortgage? And I'm like, hang on a second. You guys want what I have. Yeah. You want the comfortable middle-class lifestyle. And there's nothing wrong with that. I don't think that's the be-all and the end-all of the Christian life. But the point is, these guys who are telling me, go all in for Jesus, ascend, give everything to him. But when you're 35, what you really want is a mortgage. And suddenly God is calling you back to your home country when your children approach 16, 17, because they need to get their education sorted out. These are not bad things to do. And so a lot of people are, in that sense, maturing from YWAM in Norway. But they just need to be clear at their sort of revival meetings, the send. They say, go all in for Jesus when you're 22. I'm sure you can do many funny things when you're 22. But just be aware that the culture, the system, the strategy we have at my church, which I don't criticize, is that you settle down, get a job, attain the middle-class lifestyle that you lied you didn't want. You do want it when you're 35. So in terms of the general charismania, all of the William Branham stuff, there has been a fair amount of that as well locally in my town. There was a church nearby us where a lot of people were ex-YWAM as well. There's 5 good churches in the town. They had someone saying, we're going to build this new building, we're going to buy a plot of land, and it's going to be great. And a group of people in the church said, oh, hang on a second, I don't think that's going to work very well, and it would take a miracle, an act of God for this to go well. They said, they said it's a miracle, an act of God. No, we didn't say that was going to happen. It would take a miracle for this to work. The building project didn't work, and that church ended up causing a lot of people to lose their mortgages and their life savings for this failed building project. So that was a situation with Philadelphia in Harmar. There haven't been the rather sadly standard large-scale sex scandals going on in my hometown. It's largely been financial related, and a lot of people just burning out and having given so much to the organisation in terms of time, or let's say money, because I don't have any, and then reaching their 30s and just not really knowing what to do next with their life. So that's what I've experienced almost being in YWAM.
Well, I have to admit, I have a really heavy screening process. So when people send me information, I dive deeply, and the moment I hit the point where you're talking about Stewie, which half of our audience probably has no idea who is, it's kind of funny. The moment I hit that, I'm like, okay, I got to have this guy on so we can talk about Stewie. crazy funny, but your humor in there, actually, it was the humor that I picked up on because that will resonate with the audience. But the humor was so targeted and directed at things that really need to be talked about. Youth wanting a marriage. I think I've actually heard that phrase from somebody else, but the way that they push people to make relationships that are cohesive to the church, for me, I mean, this is going to happen in any church, right? But if you do it in Hawaii, there's no way you're going to forget this memory. And if you just happen to take your mate in Hawaii, there's no way either one of you are going to forget this memory. Now that is associated with the church, and you're creating this strategy where you're literally, it's like love bombing the people to keep them in, rather than an actual mission to help people. I mean, who you're going to help in Hawaii, right? What? I'm like, the whole thing just doesn't make sense to me. But here's what I have as a problem with that. I don't really have a problem with a church giving kids experience. I actually think that's a good thing. So in that, I will probably say that I'm in favor of YWAM to some extent, but you don't frame it as the mission, right? You don't, like, if I was a pastor, which I'm not, I never want to be, but if I were to say, okay, church, we're going to take all of your kids and we're going to take them to Hawaii, we're going to have fun, we're going to party, and we're going to have glory for God in the place, and children can see how to behave in a normal situation and still be a believer in God. And then we're going to come back and train for helping people to learn more about Jesus. That's a good thing. I see that as very healthy. But framing it as the mission, like the end of days mission, we're going to have an end of days mission, and you're going to go party in Hawaii. I just don't get it, man.
I think some of your other guests talked about a psychological problem, which is when you're getting beaten down by fasting and not sleeping enough and eating well, you end up being in a psychological state where you want to latch on to a motherly figure or a fatherly figure. And that can be quite a risk. And you might think that you've formed these bonds in YWAM and these high control, high requirement groups, but what you're really doing is you'd have latched onto anyone, really. And it's a bit Stockholm syndrome there, is what I've seen. But when you've got well-fed people who are in comfortable areas, that's also a challenge in the Christian life, to learn to rely on God, certainly. But you're less likely to be carried up and swept into someone's ill-thought, ill-conceived plan for mass revival. It was always one of my biggest fears growing up. The pastor at the front was going to, start jumping in the air and saying, we're all going to go out and evangelize the local supermarket. Let's all go out into the streets now. I was always really afraid of that for some reason. Thankfully, it was an irrational fear, but it wouldn't be past a lot of the churches. To get onto the sort of Stewie Family Guy line of thinking, this was originally about me framing it, talking about believing in the Holy Spirit and the gifts of the Spirit, because often, as I mentioned earlier, when I was growing up, people would say, "You don't believe in this; you're a cessationist." Let me introduce you to the phrase which I've coined. I've never heard anyone else say it. It's called Lessianism. It's not cessation; it's Lessiation. So I happen to speak 6 languages: French, Spanish, German, Norwegian, and Chinese, and a smattering of English. I didn't make up any of those languages. So when I'm meeting somebody who says, "Do you speak in tongues?" I'll often just respond to them in the language that I think they won't speak. Some people do speak French, and I say, I was speaking in tongues, as Acts 2 demonstrates. It wasn't because the disciples said, "Oh, we're just going to babble now and throw popcorn in the air, run around with the mouth open and see how much we catch." They were told by other people, "Oh, wow, they're speaking our languages." So the analogy I came up with was Stewie from Family Guy saying, "Oh, hey, Brian, is this how anyone speaks in this episode?" It's Seth MacFarlane doing an impression of how British people speak. Whereas if you want to hear how someone from the UK speaks, well, listen to me or some of your other guests, and Patrick Stewart, and that's the real accent. But if someone had just been raised on Stewie from Family Guy, they think, well, he's the real deal. Do you not believe in British accents? Well, I do, but he's not speaking the right way. And the reason that we know that he's not speaking true isn't because we've studied his accent. It's because if you know the real way people speak, like Patrick Stewart, myself, and even the variants of Scottish and Welsh, you realise there's a huge wealth of diversity. And I wouldn't need to make up any accent from the British Isles. I would just simply say, look, there it is, listen to that. That's quite different to how Stewie speaks. But do you see the fake one now? That was the analogy I was going for with the gifts of the Holy Spirit, which always tends to be speaking in tongues. That's the easiest one to kind of fake up on a stage. And if I remember everything I've learned from you, it starts with Param. Then there's a guy who goes to Africa, and they all try and speak in the local language, and it turns out it's all making up. And then someone goes, oh, look, I've got a load of Chinese, and it was just all made up scribbles as well. So then the whole movement said, well, we'll move away from it being languages that people can understand to this language of angels. I'm sure the angels up there go scratching their head and saying, well, we don't understand what you're saying either. Can you not just have a serious conversation instead of babbling? And so that was the analogy I was going for then. And it also made me think of something else today. There was some people I know from the US who were having a Scottish day because they were proud of their Scottish heritage. And they were coming up with a few things which were correct. But I've got a fairly good knowledge of Scotland, even more so Norway, but let's stick with Scotland. And I would say to them, well, this is how they do things in Scotland. And they say, well, you're making this up. Well, I don't need to make any of it up because there's a huge wealth of reality. You don't need to make something up when it's true. I would say to them, have you heard of Iron Brew? Not many people outside of Scotland have. Do you know the two main football rivalries in Glasgow? Do you know the difference between Gaelic and Gaelic? All these things that can draw on the huge wealth of experience in Scotland. I wouldn't need to make anything up. And so that's what strikes me with the charismania movement, is how much stuff is just, if it's true, if this is your Holy Spirit, why is he less than what we read about in the New Testament? Lessationist. I'm not cessationist. I believe that God can move however he wants to. But when we compare it to the modern Gnostics, which I increasingly call them, I'd say to them, your Holy Spirit is less than what I would come to expect from someone who calls themselves a charismatic. Your Holy Spirit can't speak in tongues. Your Holy Spirit rarely heals. And there's a get-out clause, as even when he does heal, that's not a mark of the true salvation. It's about the fruit of the Spirit. So yeah, that's what I've noticed mainly with the whole fake healing stuff as well.
One of the points that you brought up in the email, I had actually never thought of it that way. And the funny part is, once you said it in your humorous way, I caught it because I pick up on the humor, right? I thought at that moment, I've had other guests try to say this, but it really didn't click with me. And hopefully it clicks with the audience. But you said something to the effect, and I'm going off of memory, but there's the economic reality of all in for God versus the real life. This is something that I knew. I mean, that's what they're all talking about, right? You're all in until you're not. And you're all in thinking this is the end of the world mission, but then you're watching people graduate and leave, and they go home, and what happened to their life? They've not gone to college. They have no real work skills. They have, some of them, I mean, I hate to say it, but it's like you're robbing that part of their life, the part that's most fundamental, robbing it from them, and then throwing them on the street, because what are they going to do when they get back out? You're kind of stuck in this limbo between the real world and the church, and the church has, I hate to say it, but it feels like the church has failed you in that aspect, because you're all in, end of the world is coming, we've got this end of days revival, and now you can go home.
Yeah, I grew up on the edge of the yearning for revival. We knew of the Welsh revival. That was very different. That was in the Welsh language, and there are a couple of links between him and Azusa Street. They tried to reach out to him, and he was like, well, okay, it's nice to hear from you, but I don't think I want to appear on your podcast, more or less. Nigel Evans, John, whatever it's called, Mr. Welsh Revival, he didn't want anything to do with Azusa. They contacted him, and he said, well, no thanks. But the Welsh Revival was quite short. It's a bit like the Asbury Revival. It's right, no more revival, we're finished with that. What it's talking about in my email when it's saying all in for Jesus is that the local YWAM base now in Norway, I'm 20 minutes drive away from it, they're doing 24/7 hour prayer. Yikes. And that level of demand is, I don't think God wants that much. I've just been reading through Exodus with my prayer mate, who's the son of the founder of the church, on that. And we were struck by how God says in the tabernacle, when they're constructing it, God actually says to them, right, enough, we don't need any more donations. Imagine if a church leader said that in his newsletter, no more tithes, I have enough private jets. Yeah. I don't need any more. So that's what really struck us from reading Exodus. Wow, Moses is not acting like a modern Pentecostal Branhamite. He's, Johnny's saying, we've got enough gold, don't give us any more. When God says give enough, I think we're used to the parable of the 10,000 talents and the 5,000 talents. But the issue of sufficiency, I think if I started a prayer room, it would be called 30 minutes a week, 30 minutes a day, like 30 minutes once a week. I wouldn't want to push it. It's the analogy of the hare and the tortoise, right? I'm surrounded by people in their early 20s and then their mid 30s saying, we went all in for Jesus. We went to the prayer meeting, we went to everything. And then I'm left saying, great, you can help out at Sunday school with me. No. Right. Okay. Well, it's not really Hawaii, is it? So I'm the only person going on a church Sunday school leaders conference for my church for the 1s to 6s because it's not Hawaii, is it? That's not everyone. That's everyone not going all in that regard. They're waving the shoes during the send, which was it started with the call, didn't it? It was the call with a certain Mike Bickle, which I'm sure we're familiar with, and he started off with a couple of other guys, and then that became the send. I played a part in stopping Todd White come to Norway because I said, this guy's a lunatic. He's from Hogwarts. We don't want any of that. And because we were told it was a non-denominational thing, everyone's going to be involved. But I said, Todd White is right up there on the top corner of what can still be called Christian. And I would place myself kind of in the middle, maybe a little bit more Calvinist during 21 day a week. But he was right out there. And I said, none of that. So this whole all-in thing just doesn't play out in a kind of regular, just show up at church on a Sunday, maybe one Sunday a week, one Sunday a month if you can manage it. The people are still going all in for Jesus when they're on their missions trip and when they're 22. They're just absent. And far from me having deep theological discussions with these YWAMers or ex-YWAMers, they're just not there that frequently at church. They're often on the base because the base is they're serving, or there's another worship team, or there's a Heidi Baker. I think she came a few years ago before COVID, which they didn't prophesy. And there's always some project or something going on at the base. There's a lot of growth there. They've bought new land and property on the base. But my wife and I have said that we will have more to do with the Roman Catholic Church than the local YWAM base. I hope to never serve there again, and I'm in the process of dissuading people from going. I'm not saying warning. I wouldn't persuade them. I would dissuade them and say, think carefully about it. Just be aware that you'll go all in your 20s, and you'll hit 35, and you'll desperately want a mortgage. You'll want what I have. I don't want what they have. It's called youth with a mission, and when you're approaching 35, it's high time you're out. The local leader, he in YWAM Norway, he's written some great books, yeah. But there have been young men who've been promoting his book for free, and you're shifting copy for someone who's got his mortgage, he's got his house, and ultimately, what's going on here? What are we all in for? Are we all in for Jesus? But then we realise, oh, hang on a second, I want to put everything in to get a deposit on my house. And I've received so many of those newsletters from people who are at the same stage of life as me. I'm an immigrant and they're Norwegian and they're asking for help getting set up in Norway. I'm like, well, I didn't speak the language 15 years ago. I can figure out how to live in this country better than they can. It's because I haven't done YWAM. And it's because I just cracked on and got a job and got involved to a certain extent in the local church as much as I could. And I guess that would be my vision. Just get stuck in, do the Sunday school, help out in the worship team if you want to. But avoid large scale meetings of the Send. The Send was there's been so much focus on that. I'm sure your listeners, viewers are aware of what the Send was and still is. It's I guess you call it the grandson of what was happening, was started in Kansas City. I'm sure I'm edging into stuff you would have documented far better because it's almost history. It started with the call, didn't it? And then it became the Send.
Yeah, it did. One of the things that I don't think people think through very carefully, which you're alluding to, but I'm going to actually go deeper there. And I don't talk about this purposely because I don't want people to... This is a large group of people who have been robbed in many ways of their money, and I don't want it to come across like I'm begging for money. But my family had $0 in retirement whenever I was 43 years old. You almost can't come back from that, right? In fact, I don't know that I will. Every one of these people that get involved with this and they escape at the point in which you're talking about, 30 years old, say. 30 years old, you're not even thinking that retirement is an issue for them. But when you take away the ability to have a good salary job, suddenly you're thrown into where I was back at, I don't know, age 20, 25, when we first got married. All of my money, every spare dime that I had, went towards just living. That's it. We really didn't have any extra. The thought of retirement wasn't even possible for another 10, 15 years. So now take these people, another 10, 15 years from that, they're actually getting a start on retirement later than I did whenever I left the cult. And I didn't leave a youth cult. So I look at this and I think, my gosh, man, I'm scrambling to try to make a way in which my family can be protected whenever I do retire or I'm not able to work. Every single one of these people that escape from this, they all have the same issue that I have. And I have strong compassion for that.
Yeah, I do too. I've done what I can to talk with young men who are about my age, early to mid to late 30s, who have been in for a decade. And I'm just saying to them, get out. But I almost wish I could speak their language. Maybe I've received a word from God, John. And the Lord appeared to me as I stood on the mountain, and there was a picture of a river, and I could blag it, I think. I did have to, speaking to someone recently about the problems in Norway, I gave the picture of me feeling like I was a little sort of a tin aluminium foil light amongst three braziers. And he's like, wow, that's really powerful imagery. I just thought, it sounds... But what I meant to say to him was that I really feel there's an absence here, and these people are missing out financially. And I think it says in the book of Proverbs, money answers everything. No, money gives an answer to everything. And quite often I've done that when people say, oh, we see that you don't eat out much in restaurants. I'd love to say it's an ideological reason. It's just we don't have enough money for it. And so when people are coming out of YWAM or, still finding themselves in it, I would say spiritual stuff aside, let's all agree that what you're showing us you want is a house and a car and stability. These are all good things. Can we preach that to the youth? Well, not really youth, as I did say earlier, and I won't retract it. I think it's a good laugh if you want to do it for a gap year and you've saved up the money. People can spend the money on all sorts of funny things. But when you've been doing it for 2 or 3 years, people then move up on the track. They do. You do discipleship training school, and you can lead a discipleship school. 20 or 21, that's very unhealthy. And then when you're 22, you sort of do your third year, then you do your School of Biblical Studies. Thank goodness. But it's like, well, why didn't you do that in your first year? Because the content of the discipleship training school is very high paced. Each of the speakers will say these are the most important this will be the most important talk of your life. And there's a lot of hype there, and people go on their first mission trip after 6 months, and they just want to street evangelize everyone. And I wouldn't want to knock that aspect of Christianity at all. Great, do it when you're 20. But yeah, how do you get these people out? And what you're describing with the difficulty of not having any money when you retire is that a lot of the newsletters from YWAM, they're not reflecting a community which is happy to go by with very little money. Because if the ex-YWAMers were all buying a house for next to nothing and then just all doing it up to kind of like the Amish, really, and the Mennonites, it's just like, okay, you've got this rebuild project. It's got no door, no window. We'll all come along. We'll do some carpentry. And hey, you bought this house for what most people buy a car. I'll be like, well, that's a really challenging way of living. They're getting by with next to nothing. They're walking. They're not, though. They all went their 4-bedroom detached with 2 cars. That's more than I have. I've only got 1 car. I cycle to work every day in the freezing cold. So the standard the ex-YWAMers want to get to is higher than what I have. And I'm just like, well, you've got to work for these things. And suddenly you're hoping that your parents haven't done YWAM, because you're hoping that they'll help you with the deposit. So it becomes a bit like it is an extractive group. Or another way of putting it, it's a bit like the Klingons, really. You're just sort of raiding people. And at some point you need to get civilized and sort of settle down and, learn the first order and and all these sort of things. Whereas you need to build a civilization. You can't just raid off other people. And you can call it a prayer letter, but it is raiding. You're raiding people who are creating stuff, and it's an infringement of. I'm sure you might not have expected me to go here. It's an infringement of 7th century Christianity, because the monasteries, when the Roman Empire collapsed, the monks said, right, what are we going to do? And they started brewing beer and doing honey and all these things. So then when the barbarians came and wanted to attack the monasteries, why did they survive? Because they're like, well, we don't know how to brew beer or make honey. So the monks said, you could raid and pillage, or we could sell you these things. And they're like, well, okay, we do want beer. Like all of the German beers, they're all named after monks. That's what the monks were doing. So these monasteries they weren't standing around praying. I'm sure there were a few monks who said, hey guys, you remember that praying thing we used to do? No, we've moved on from that. That's so prosaic. Yeah, that whole God thing. Well, that's very 5th century. You've got to move with the times. It's all about the mead. It's about the beer and the cheese. You must have guys, these guys aren't monks at all. Well, what they were showing pagan Europe was a way of living and working. Get a job, settle down. I'm sorry, we can't come out of these walls because you'll just kill us. Sorry. So we're going to settle down. Cluny and all of these monks and monasteries around Switzerland. That was the beginning of European capitalism. These guys were working hard. They showed the rest of society, look, going around raping and pillaging, that's not economically sustainable. It's worse than a sin. It doesn't make economic sense. As Napoleon said, it's worse than a crime. It was a blunder. So to go around just killing and destroying or writing prayer newsletters because you don't earn any money, that's just not sustainable in the long term. So I used to joke about the local YWAM base being a bit like a monastery. Well, sadly, it's not. The modern monasteries are very prayer focused, which is not really that's that you're not going to make a living out of that. But the monasteries kind of dissolved by the 15th century, 16th century, because they'd shown society what it needed to be doing. In a sense, we've all become monks in a good way, that we've all got a job, and I'm sure we do our home brewing projects. I do a little bit of yeast and sugar, it's all the stuff. We work for a living. We don't go around pillaging. So I don't think the YWAMs are monks enough. They're ascetics and they're pietists. They do realise that they need to get a job and create economic benefit for their family. Doesn't it say in 1 Thessalonians or 1 Timothy that whoever wrote that said, I despise the person who doesn't work? And I've brought that up with the YWAMs. They said, well, Paul didn't work. Oh, yes, he did. He was a tent maker. I know, but he said something about the oxen not being shackled and, should eat while it's treading the corn. So he was a tent maker. Let's just stick with that one detail. So the power and the normality of work it's what they end up wanting. But I think I might be misremembering, but it might have been I was listening to one of your guests or someone else that said that when you get to a certain point in life, you end up just wanting the things which you lied that you eschewed. It is a good sign that they do want to settle down. But I just sort of kind of wish I wish that all of that was said on the stage at the Send, and all these things. So that's what you'll end up wanting, and these are not bad things to want.
Have you ever wondered how the Pentecostal movement started, or how the progression of modern Pentecostalism transitioned through the latter rain, Charismatic, and other fringe movements into the New Apostolic Reformation? You can learn this and more on William Branham Historical Research's website, william-branham.org. On the books page of the website, you can find the compiled research of John Collins, Charles Paisley, Stephen Montgomery, John McKinnon, and others, with links to the paper, audio, and digital versions of each book. You can also find resources and documentation on various people and topics related to those movements. If you want to contribute to the cause, you can support the podcast by clicking the Contribute button at the top. And as always, be sure to like and subscribe to the audio or video version that you're listening to or watching. On behalf of William Branham Historical Research, we want to thank you for your support. One of the things that really stood out to me as I was reading your email, that again, these are things that I should have really clicked with, and I didn't until your humor picked me up, but youth with a mission. What does it make you think of when you think youth with a mission? It makes you think of the youth, right? They don't say, late teenagers with a mission or early 20-year-old with a mission. Yet every single person that I have spoken to, they tell me it's late teens, early 20s. My frame of reference, even after they said that, is still youth with a mission. And so it makes you wonder really about branding. Was the name all about branding, or was there initial some goal that they were actually going to do the youth? And in that case, if the initial mission was a 6-year-old, and we're going to take a 6-year-old and convert the world, and then when they turn to a teenager, we're going to teach them how to go to college, how to get a job, how to do all these things. Actually, that's not that bad, but then you wonder what the mission is, right? And what is a 6-year-old going to do? So I'm wondering, was the intent to do something that was good and healthy, and then it kind of transitioned when they realized, wait a minute, it's kind of like Parham sending all of the missionaries to China who can't speak in tongues. We can't send 6-year-olds out there because they're not going to do God's work. They're probably going to be playing with rocks or whatever. So, so I'm sitting here thinking, was it branding, or did they really have the initial mission?
We grew up singing that Joel's Army song, I'm in the Lord's Army, as well. And a lot of YWAMs do talk about raising kingdom children, where they want their children to be co-participators in the mission field until they turn 15, and they've got to go back and get a further education, which is a good thing. And there seems to be, thank God, and I do thank God that He's been merciful to YWAM in that regard. It's not a generational thing that's always passed on. It's not a given that your children are going to do YWAM and live with you on base. What usually happens is the children go back to their home country and settle down, finish off high school, and then maybe go to college and then do YWAM. So it's not. There's still a lot of new genes come into the organisation. Not just kind of a generation thing going along, but I think when Lauren Cunningham started it came out of the Jesus Revolution with a thingy frisbee and all of that. I don't think Lauren. It's not his style to go in for those kind of allegations. And I met the guy once, and well, I have no idea what's going on behind the scenes. Maybe we'll find out something in 5 years. Tends to happen. I wouldn't cast any aspersions on him now, but a lot of people said that about Mike Bickle, right? Who knows? Don't know anything about Lauren Cunningham, Ravi Zacharias, but what they were thinking about in YWAM was, I guess, people in their 20s with a mission, youth without any money, youth wanting to marry. You were already married. It's strange that that's the thing that they say in YWAM. You're not supposed to date during those 6 months, but I would say, well, that's the time when you probably should be dating. do it like a Viking plunder raid. Get the woman or the man and get out, run away before they come and stop you. This isn't a dating thing. Of course, it's a dating thing. It's one of the best dating things you can do, because when you meet a woman or a man during YWAM, you've got no money. And so they're attracted to you because of your character. And I'm like, that's I respect that. If you're a 20-year-old bloke and you can marry, you can marry a woman who's 20 as well, and she's attracted to you, you've got no money or anything. Like, well, credit to you, man. You've done a pretty good job. You've got no flashy car to show off to her. I certainly do hope you have that in 15 years' time, and you're not still in YWAM. But if they nabbed the woman pretty early on in Viking raid style, I would say, that's, for me, that's mission fulfilled. Maybe that was the mission of YWAM. The Christian life isn't all about getting married whatsoever at all. But for them to say don't date while you're there, it doesn't make a huge amount of sense to me. I would say go for it. I'm trying to think to myself what other hilarity I did mention in that email, because I sent a couple of ones for the lols. That was my central analogy, I think, the all-in and the gift of the Spirit versus the fruits of the Spirit as well. There's some great stuff from the local base coming out, but the direction it's gone recently. What I also wanted to mention is without opening a can of worms of the whole Charlie Kirk thing that's going on, but the external Americanization and the politicization of the Norwegian church is a risk. That's not such an issue locally. There are a few people at church who want to make Europe great again, whatever that means. And everyone can have their own political opinion about various things. But what tends to happen is that people come from a low Lutheran church background in Norway and confuse fluency in English and a Californian accent with kind of theological reliability. And, even worse than being Californian, if someone's British and white, they're even higher up in the chain of things. He sounds thought through because he's British.
Yeah.
Whereas anyone who's from the UK, they know, hang on, Daniel's working class. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's never been to private school. So outside of the UK, John, people would think, oh, Daniel's really clever. But what happens in Europe, particularly, not so much South America, is that when people hear that you're a native speaker, they have a lot more respect for you. Well, they think you know what you're saying because you've got more vocabulary than they have. And that's confusing fluency with actual knowledge of the subject. And it's been, I take the verse in Acts very seriously, that when Paul spoke to the crowd in Aramaic, they became silent. That's not saying that we should all learn Aramaic. It's simply that he spoke to them in the way that they could understand clearly. He didn't speak high convoluted Greek. We know that Peter's Greek was terrible. They spoke urgent street Greek, and they spoke Aramaic when they could. Speak to the people in the language they can. We had an example in a church thing that I was trying to do in another town along, and some people who were trying to help me, they went along to the YWAM base and said, oh, could you help us plant a church? And because there was a non-Norwegian speaker there, they all spoke in English, and they were saying, oh, we bless you, a light will shine over this town, and, pouring out mountains, 7 thunders, all of this stuff, hashtag nonsense. But if they'd said it in Norwegian, they'd have simply said, that's great. We don't have the resources to prioritize this logistically. Sorry, wish you all the best. But because it was in English, they became very superficial. The old saying, on the surface, they were superficial, but deep down they were profound, or the other way around. On the surface, they were profound, but deep down they were superficial. So what tends to happen is that young people go to Hawaii, invariably, sometimes Montana, and pick up an Americanized form of Christianity. There are some great things with American Christianity. The fact that there's no state church is good. That's a good thing. I'm glad there is no state church in the US. But the worst elements they're copying only come from Branhamism. And I've spoken with so many people recently from YWAM who've never heard of William Branham. When I say, okay, you can list off the family tree, there's no point in me doing it. They'll be like, oh yeah, we've heard of that guy. Well, you've heard of that guy, then you'll have heard of Branham. You've heard of Azusa Street. You've heard of Azusa Street. You've heard of it all. This is your history, I'm telling you. They really should know it, because they've all got books about Azusa Street, and they want that to happen in Norway, not to mention Elim and all of that stuff. This is their family tree. I got in contact with a woman who was on with Sissel, who was on your show last year, and as you can do in Norway, you can find anyone. So I just googled her and sent her a message, and we had a really good chat about what's happening. And there was an entry into Norway from Branhamism that actually came through Stavanger. Which was through Livets Ord, which was a church out there. So Branhamism has infected Norway in that regard. Not as strong as you'd think, but it's actually come in through, I guess it would be almost like people learning about the US through New Brunswick. You'd be like, well, New Brunswick, that's in Canada, right? So people have been exposed to Branhamism fourth hand through YWAM. It hasn't directly come through Kenneth Hagin. Kenneth Hagin was in Stavanger, we know that. And you can track that line of thinking, and all of that fizzled out by the 2000s, thank goodness. But the real exposure is through, the real exposure is through I guess you call it second or third cousins through YWAM. That's the Branhamism link in Norway.
I keep mentioning your email. I'm going to say that you probably need to write a book because your way of explaining it, man. So I hit this roadblock whenever I was talking with Jenny. There's some verbiage that in the United States right now is so highly politicized that if you mention it, they just shut you off. They don't hear it. But the way that you said it, I'm going to say the same exact thing that she said, but I'm going to say it in your language. And maybe it will resonate with the listeners who have turned her off. She mentioned a phrase that is politicized, but basically it means what you said. So you have this language that is seen as highly respected among different cultures. And you're going out on these missions to people who, there's no better way to say it, they were infected. All of these lands were infected by the Pentecostal movement, not Pentecostalism in general, that's a gray area for me still. But this healing revival thing, it spread all over the globe. You go to South America, they've already been infected. You go to South Africa, they've already been infected. Now send a person who speaks either British or American English immediately you've got this respect that you would not have already had. Combine that with, oh, and they're telling us more about our heritage, our Pentecostal heritage that came from latter rain, not even the original Pentecostal. So basically, they've already been infected, and now you're bringing a catalyst to that infection. Jenny had a different word for it, which I'm not going to use, but it means the same exact thing. You are overprivileged for no reason. And that's what these youth with a mission camps, that's really what they are. Which leads me to the other question, which it's like I'm defending them in this podcast. It's kind of funny. If you instead send them to Hawaii, you don't get that. So this may actually be a good thing, right? And as far as Lauren Cunningham doing anything inappropriate, I've never ever heard that. I don't know if that's true or not. But if I see him transitioning away from, okay, we're sending these people and they're getting this undue respect and we can't penetrate the gospel to them, we're going to instead go to Hawaii and have fun. I kind of get that.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, and in my email, I talked about cultural superiority, which is definitely a thing in Europe. That there's the everyone's white, but barring a few immigrants. But you do have national superiority in terms of how long that country was under communism for, and there's no chance you're going to get a Romanian base leader in the UK. But of course, you get a British base leader in Romania naturally. Because they know what they're talking about, because they speak the original King James English that the Bible was written in, as we all know. And that's another tangent, the King James version of the Bible. That's caused us a lot of confusion as well with a lot of Christians. They think you have to address God in kind of 16th century British English without realizing the revolution of you could call God thee, thou. You can use the informal with God, which is revolutionary at the time. So if we use that version of speaking to God, and you need to use really urgent street Greek. So the kind of missionaries we need are people from Nigeria and Sri Lanka and Singapore who speak good enough English, but they don't speak it like me. They don't speak it like you, and they certainly don't speak it like anyone in Norway. They've got a very good usage of it. They can use really powerful idioms and analogies that we wouldn't think of, and they're not using as many Latin words. I'll just give you two examples of something I was saying to some Norwegians. Was if I said to you, we must persevere regardless of the circumstances. It's good, isn't it? But if I said to you, don't give up, try. It's the same thing, but one of them is just trying to sound high and convoluted, and the other one is just urgent. Don't give up, try. That's how we need to be. Conveying the gospel. And when we start filling it with Christianese and seasons, don't get me started on that phrase. I work as a guard, and talk to me about seasons. But how much loaded language in Christianese are we using? And how much fluency of English are we confusing with knowledge of the gospel and how it actually works? And on that point, in almost every language in Europe, they talk about their word for the gospel is evangelium or evangelia, but words to that effect. It's only in English that we actually use the word gospel, which comes from the ancient Anglo-Saxon word good spell, because they thought, oh, well, this is really good. It's better than our witchcraft and wizardry, because it actually worked. It was effective. Or maybe it was a play on words that they said, oh, the real good spell isn't about Expelliarmus and Hogwarts stuff. It's actually that Jesus died for your sins. That's the real gospel. That's the good spell. And so English, in that sense, won the word language by coming up with a term that just worked really well for us locally. And it's a really good point you're saying that hopefully we could silo the economically and culturally superior, at least in their own eyes. You could silo them off to Hawaii, where they can all, just be a bit sort of Elysium in the clouds. And the perceived culturally inferior people could actually just get on with doing the church gospel work, because they can. They're not going somewhere and confusing economic prowess with actually being thought through. It's kind of like when you meet, if you have a 55-year-old truck driver who's got no pension, yeah, sure, he's going to look a lot richer to someone from Ukraine or Thailand, but that's only comparatively. And but if someone from Thailand, Ukraine, who's an accountant and a lawyer, they might only earn as much as that truck driver. So when you apply that in a church context, when you've got a 22-year-old who goes abroad and says, oh, I don't really have much money, so I've only got $500 in the bank. Well, you got $500 in the bank, you're rich. You go to somebody's place, you must be really thought through because you've got so much money because the Lord has blessed you. Well, only because where I was born has got nothing to do with me. And so if I went to Rwanda, I could find myself rubbing toes with a very faithful man of God from Sri Lanka and Singapore who's got nothing like the net worth that I do, but they've got a huge store, they've got wealth treasured up in heaven that's worth far more than what I have. So that's what I've experienced here. It really is the culture of superior. I think though, as people have gotten to know me better in Norway and in my church, like, I don't know what he's talking about. So all of the cultural superiority I used to have for being British, that's gone out the window.
Well, there's such a language barrier. I was thinking as you were talking, I'm diabetic, and whenever my blood sugar gets low, I get shaky and I get hangry. And there are times that my wife and I will clash, and afterwards I realize that wasn't me talking. That was actually the diabetes. I just had the thought as you were talking, well, what if I started doing that in King James English? Yeah. Would I have more power over her because, the mesmerization of the King James? But the problem is I would be doing the Stewie version, not the Patrick Stewart version.
The Stewie, not Patrick Stewart. Yeah, maybe that should be in the show notes. Be Patrick Stewart, not Stewart. From Stewart to Stewie, the decline of 21st century Christianity. That's it. It's about being genuine when you talk with people and using the language they understand. The Bible's not afraid of translations. Matthew quoted from the Greek translation of the Old Testament. I think he was supposed to be the most Jewish writer of the Gospels. We're not against saying things in different languages because truth does translate. I've been a translator. So whenever you hear someone saying, the Gospel doesn't translate, I've translated it from English, from Norwegian to English, and I could explain the Gospel in German, pretty well in French and Spanish, and I could write it in Chinese. I'm not boasting. I didn't invent any of those languages, but it's quite simple to explain the Gospel. And when you're wrapping it up in King James English, and this is when I'd recommend anyone listening and watching to research false friends in King James Version of the Bible, because when it says in Galatians, we must be good in our conversation in King James English meant behavior. So there's lots of different examples in the King James English which have changed now. So when you read the Bible in King James English, there's a good chance you won't know what it's saying. Elijah says, how long will you halt between two mountains? He means, you're not saying stop. Halt used to mean walk slowly between two mountains, or seven mountains for that matter. So when you communicate people, well, again, sort of going back to my earlier point, what have you got to hide? Why are you trying to hide behind high language and convoluted language? Unless you're trying to sound smart, it's not going to be any more specific. Like you say something in Latin and it just means the same thing. You're just talking about parts of the bone. An elbow is still an elbow, even if you can say it in Latin. Yeah. I heard of a doctor who found herself in the Congo in the late 90s, and she was captured by the local rebels or whatever, and she was on the BBC, and she said that she escaped by pretending to be a holy priest woman who could speak Latin, and she was just reciting the names of plants and body items in Latin, because they've been used to hearing the Latin Mass from Roman Catholicism. This is a woman from God because she's saying incantations. As Christians, we don't believe in enchanting. We don't believe in singing about truth. We just believe in proclaiming a very simple gospel in a language that people understand. And not standing up and speaking in tongues or making up languages that angels don't understand, and in private anyway. It's about clarity of the message, trigger word. That for me would be my gospel. I can explain the gospel in Norwegian. It's not very difficult. The language isn't very difficult either. But the truth does translate. What I really struggled to translate is when I was explaining to someone the whole history of Branhamism, I was like, well, you've heard of the Seven Mountains Mandate? And they said, what, the Seven Mountains voting system? No, well, mandate means something else. Because that's what it meant in Norwegian. They're like, is this a voting system? Because they thought, what, mountains get a vote? No, mandates, it means, hang on a second, what did mandate mean? And I was trying to retranslate these bizarre these bizarre terms that meant something else to William Branham when he was banging on about it, and they mean something else differently now. There is a guy in Norway who's actually translating all of Branham's sermons. Well, all of them. I'm sure he's scratching some of them out. He sits there with a tape recorder and he's translating into Norwegian. And I'll be amused to hear how he translates some of the things, because the concepts are just I just can't make head nor tail of it when I'm trying to translate them. I've tried to explain the history from Parham through Branham and Paul Kane and Mike Bickle and all this stuff. And the Black Horse. What are we saying? We shouldn't ride? No, the Black Horse has all sorts of significance, but I don't find myself doing that when I'm translating 1 Corinthians, or the Psalms. When I'm translating a church, I can, as quickly as I'm speaking now, that's how quickly I'll translate from Norwegian to English. And again, not boasting. I didn't invent the language. But truth can be translated, but I'm really struggling to explain the whole Branhamism stuff, John. Help me. I need the gift of translation.
Actually, I can explain this. I have a family member. So I know the gentleman who you're talking about. I've actually had indirect interactions with him. And here's the problem. The things that Branham said, if you understand what he's saying in his era, they are horrendous. They are things that you just don't say, and especially in today's world, you just don't say these things. So what do you do when you translate it? You either let's not translate this sermon, my brother, or you give it a completely different connotation. No, he didn't mean this racist thing. No, he wasn't insulting the races. And it's like, I have a family member who used to, whenever there would be a Spanish-speaking person in the room, as a joke, they would walk up to him and say, "Eso sé que es."
Eso sé que es. Do you know what this is?
They would look scratching their head. What is it? I just spelled socks. And so it's that kind of translation, right? It doesn't mean the thing that you think it means. That's what they're doing. It's just a play on translations, unfortunately. But anyway, I could talk another 2 hours. We'll have to save that for another day. If you had advice for the people who are trapped in this world that we're talking about, what advice would you give them?
I would say watch Lord of the Rings and read The Hobbit, because Bilbo, after he's gone on his missions trip abroad to defeat Smaug, the dwarves say of him, Bilbo has got all the gold, he's got one ring. But they said of Bilbo, I think if people spent more time focusing on beer and singing and a house, then the world would be a happier place. And whatever these YWAMers are searching for, they're not finding it. And Frodo goes on his missions trip abroad to destroy the ring. But what's not in the Peter Jackson film, which you've got to read in the book, is that he goes back to the Shire, and it's a bit of a disaster. Saruman's destroyed his house, and he's destroyed the Shire. But Frodo has come back from his missions trip, and he goes back to his house, and he's got 4 blokes with him, Frodo, Sam, and Merry and Pippin. But they've been equipped because of their mission to get involved with their Sunday school, to get involved in their local church community. So the Lord of the Rings doesn't end with them being crowned in Minas Tirith and Seven Mountain Mandate and Dominionism. It actually goes full circle. They're going back to their hobbit hole. That Sam would marry Rosie Cotton and settle down. And Lord of the Rings ends with Sam saying, "I'm home," with his 9 children or however many. He's married, he's got a home, he's got children. That's what Lord of the Rings was getting at. That's what Tolkien said you want at the end. We all want to be the hobbits. We want to live in the Shire. But no one thinks, I want to be Aragorn reigning in Minas Tirith. I've never heard anyone say that. And so if people want what the Bible's talking about illustrated, I think the Shire is a picture of God's intention for humanity. Each man owning his own house, working his own garden, settling down, getting wife, or not getting married in Frodo's case, who's perfectly fine. Bilbo didn't get married. And just getting involved as much as you can locally and helping people. And if people think, why doesn't he talk more about the Bible? Well, people explain it much better than I do. I'm very much into Lord of the Rings, and that's what I go for every year. So we want to be Frodo rather than Aragorn is what I'd ultimately say. Yeah.
And the NAR leaders, they want to be the evil sorcerer Sauron.
Yeah, they do basically. Yeah, there's a detail that just to end with. There's a detail about Morgoth, Sauron's boss. When they were creating the world in Tolkien's Legendarium, they created the world through song. But Melkor was just singing the same song with 1 or 2 notes with very little variance. And I was like, oh gosh, that's a rather terrifying detail. So the next time you listen to Pentecostal singing from Bethel, just note how much variance there is in the song. And if they're just repeating the same word 20 times, do they sound more like Melkor or do they sound more like Galadriel? whose side do you want to be on?
Well, and everything that you said about beer, it made me think. Martin Luther said, whoever drinks beer is quick to sleep, and whoever sleeps long does not sin, and whoever does not sin enters heaven. Therefore, let us drink beer, which leaves me in...
I agree.
I'm in this other category because I don't like beer, so that's probably why I'm such a troublemaker. But anyway, thank you so much for doing this.
It's been really fun, John. Thanks.
Well, if you've enjoyed our show and you want more information or to share your story, you can check us out on the web. You can find us at william-branham.org. For more about the dark side of the New Apostolic Reformation, you can read Weaponized Religion: From Christian Identity to the NAR, available on Amazon, Kindle, and Audible.